Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So, thank you, Rabbi Wasco. It was beautiful. It's always awesome listening to you. I was asked to speak about my experience at Standing Rock a few months ago. Subhanallah, when Chief Arvil put out the call for clergy and faith leaders to come, we had less than 48 hours to mobilize and do what I call a pilgrimage out to a reservation in North Dakota. Subhanallah. I never imagined that pilgrimage would reconnect me with my roots as an American Muslim, as an Iraqi, and as a person from the Shia tradition. Upon arriving at Bismarck, I looked out the window. It was early November. Due to climate change, there was no snow on the ground. Instead, I saw barren, dry land that was very reminiscent of southern Iraq, where my ancestors come from. The endless prairie had turned barren, and the earth was cracked and dry. I had never been on a Native American reservation. What I witnessed there was a town that looked like I had seen 40 years ago when I was in some of the poorest areas of southern Iraq. I saw systematic racism firsthand. I saw a town where the closest fire station was 40 miles away. I saw a town that was broken, a population that was ravaged with alcoholism and eating disorders. I saw a thriving casino that only hired Native Americans as labor, with none of them in management. Even the gift shop had dream catchers made in China. As I was sitting there at St. Joe's with the other faith leaders from around the country, ironically, I was in charge of making ham sandwiches for the next day. I sat there with our pagan brothers and sisters and our Episcopals and some Buddhists and rabbis, and I couldn't help but wonder how this really was a microcosm of the three things that we're discussing today: materialism, militarism, and racism. The next morning, we all made it out to the camps, and I met indigenous people. I met some people from the Sami of Sweden. I met some Palestinian activists. I met people from Central America. I saw the flags of indigenous tribes from around 300 nations around the United States. Oh. But what was amazing to me as we all marched, actually as we all sat there in the beginning, ooh, am I doing something wrong?
It's a test.
Oh, a test, okay. Ooh. What was amazing to me when we all sat there and had our very first prayer service, Father John Floberg and Chief Arvil asked all of the Christian denomination leaders to stand up as they denounced the doctrine of discovery. I myself, along with some of the Buddhists and Jews and pagans, stood up as well. And they said, no, you guys sit down. For once, it was not your fault. And we're like, yes. So we sat down. And we watched as each one of the denominations, with the utmost humility, apologized for what was a holy document. And we watched the humility in the indigenous leaders as they chose not to burn the letter of apology. We ended up doing a migration up the hill, which looked so prophetic and again reminded me of my days in southern Iraq. When we got up to the hill, we were listening to the different clergy. I was sitting, God bless me, with a gentleman from Palau, an indigenous leader, and I told him a little bit about my history. And for once, I finally realized when I told him that I was a Marsh Arab from the holy city of Najaf in the south of Iraq. And he said, do you realize you are from the oldest indigenous tribe in the world? And it had never hit me. It had never hit me that I come from an indigenous tribe that is 5,000 years old. And then I was reminded about the parallels of the Iraqi war. And I was also reminded about how my ancestors that first came to this country were slaves from Africa because of that doctrine of discovery. how they were dignified hajis and theological thinkers from Africa and Timbuktu that had been brought here and had used Arabic as a language to communicate and to run to freedom. But what most struck me was the parallels of my family, what they had gone through in southern Iraq. Right in the marshlands where God created Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden from that dust and that water and breathed life into them and say be. Gas pipelines and oil pipelines were used as weapons of torture. Saddam, in order to persecute the Shia in 1992, diverted the water of the Tigris by damming the Euphrates and used that as a form of torture, as the world watched. In 1991, when they put blatantly, as I saw them doing in Standing Rock, put pipelines underneath the marshlands and totally use the indigenous population, the intellectually sophisticated Iraqis. Not only did they have to see their libraries, their 1,000-year-old libraries, bombed and watch the fires approaching as towns completely tried to collect the books that were burning. Not only did they have to see Swedish and foreign employees of Halliburton come and take over their jobs, but they had to face the humiliation of waking up a few years later, children carrying Halliburton lunchboxes to makeshift schools, children being born with 6 fingers because of the environmental destruction, and people selling their livers in downtown Baghdad as gas was $17 a gallon. And I did not want that to happen in Standing Rock. And as I stood there on a flatbed, seeing the tanks and the drones, for once, I got to see a glimpse of what my family probably had to go through. And I realized how we were all connected. And during that time, subhanAllah, it was in November. It was the holy month of Muharram in the Shia tradition. That is the month where the beloved grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, Imam Hussein, and his family, and a tribe of 72, stood up to an oppressor in the land of Karbala, the very same land where God created man and Adam and Eve and breathed life into them, that is now destroyed, that is now the cause of starvation and hunger, 40 miles away from Babylon, 40 miles away from Babylon. It was during that month that Imam Hussein and his family succumbed to the violence of an oppressor and started the ultimate nonviolent resistant movement. And it is often quoted by several leaders around the world, in particular Gandhi, who said, if I had an army of 72 people, I would have liberated India within 24 hours, like Imam Hussein did. Nelson Mandela, as he was just about to succumb to the South African army and be released from prison, he remembered the words of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein, the grandson, who had the same smile as our beloved prophet. And today, this weekend, we remember Dr. Martin Luther King, a Baptist preacher who learned from a Hindu, who learned from the grandson of a beloved prophet, who learned from our previous prophets, who were the ultimate nonviolent resistors and community organizers. We are all indeed connected. And I thank you all for coming here and for your tenacity in environmental justice. For at the end of the day, it is those three. It is our ego and greed, it is materialism that goes to militarism that does ultimately result in racism. And may Allah guide us in our quest for justice, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.